Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's briefing. Please stay on the line and we will get started momentarily. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's briefing. Please note that today's call will be recorded and accessible via the ADL YouTube channel after this event. In order to maintain focus on our speakers, all participants' mics and videos have been turned off. We are pleased to offer closed captioning for this webinar. To turn your captioning on or off, please click the closed caption button on the bottom of your Zoom program screen. You can also use the up arrow next to that button to adjust the size of the captions as you need. After we hear from our speakers, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. If you are joining us today from a computer, there is a chat option on the bottom of the Zoom program where you can type your questions at any time. Alternatively, you can email questions to onlineevents@adl.org and that email address will be placed into the chat. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce ADL CEO and National Director, Jonathan Greenblatt. Jonathan, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Aisha, so much for that introduction and for setting this up. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Yesterday, New York City elected Zoran Mamdani as its next mayor. He's gotten a lot of attention, national attention, global attention, for his youth, for his charisma, for some of his policies, for his affiliation with the Democratic Socialist Party. Now, we at ADL respect the democratic process and will engage with this administration and with the mayor-elect in good faith. But the truth is, we're deeply concerned. We're deeply concerned about what the next 4 years could augur for Jewish New Yorkers. The anti-Semitic language that he has promoted, the anti-Semitic policies that he's championed, the anti-Semitic extremists who he's known to affiliate with, all of this contributes to our concern because it enables an environment where hate is tolerated and hostility has a kind of permission structure. Now, he's told us exactly who he is and what he plans to do. What I mean by that is that during the campaign, he made certain commitments on issues like Israel bonds or BDS or the Cornell Technion partnership or many others. And I believe, all of us at ADL believe, we should take him at his word. We should believe what he says, and we should be prepared to respond. Because here's what's happening in New York City right now as we're on the Zoom today. Last year, ADL recorded 976 anti-Semitic acts in the city. That's the highest count in any American city that we've ever seen since we started tracking this information 46 years ago. According to the NYPD, 54% of all hate crimes in New York City targeted Jewish people. Jewish students faced nearly 200 anti-Jewish incidents on college campuses last year, including 53 at Columbia University alone. That was the most of any higher ed institution in America. Columbia University. Visibly Orthodox Jews, who make up to 20% of our community, represent more than half of all the physical assault victims. This data is all very troubling, and yet it is simply undeniable, and it speaks to our concern. What's clear here is that the city with the largest Jewish population needs of any city, by the way, not just in America, but in the world. New York boasts a larger Jewish population than even Tel Aviv. But what's clear is that we need a mayor who will stand unequivocally against anti-Semitism in word and deed. And I say that because the mayor has been open in the last 24 hours and prior saying he's against anti-Semitism. He'll be a mayor of all Jewish New Yorkers. That is great. We are encouraged by that. We want to see that. But if the past is any prelude, we have good reason to be concerned that this mayor will not have our backs. And I'm not basing that on conjecture. I'm just looking at his record. As a student activist at Bowdoin College in Maine, Mayor-elect Mamdani founded the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter at the school. For those who are not familiar, SJP is the leading group on campuses driving the campaigns that marginalize, that target, and that victimize Jewish college students. He refused to condemn the slogan "Globalize the Intifada," which, make no mistake, is a call to violence against Jews everywhere. He embraced the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory about quote unquote deadly exchange. He literally was recorded saying on video, when the boot of the NYPD is on your neck, remember it's been laced by the ADL. That is a lie. That is a bald-faced, unambiguous lie. The NYPD does not train with the IDF. It's just not how it works. But this kind of conspiracy mongering creates anxiety, creates uncertainty, and worries Jews. Now, as a state assemblyman in Albany, he authored legislation targeting Jewish charities doing life-saving work in Israel. He wanted to make it impossible for Jews to put money towards those groups. He championed discriminatory BDS policies, which could cost taxpayers money. Now, he says it's a form of nonviolent resistance, but the BDS movement always leads to violence. So we have our concerns, but I want you all to know today that the ADL is showing up, that the ADL has your back. Our core purpose to protect the Jewish people has not changed. And again, we will quadruple down on it. We will be relentless in the work to ensure the safety and security of all Jewish New Yorkers, because that's what we do. So starting today, we've launched a couple new initiatives. First, we've created a citywide NYC anti-Semitism tip line. You can find it at adl.org/NYC. It's a place where New Yorkers can report anti-Semitic incidents that happen to them in the streets or at schools or at work or anywhere, really. Our experts will support the victims and track what's happening. Second, we're investing in enhanced research capabilities to monitor policies, to track appointments, and to evaluate funding decisions coming from City Hall that could impact our safety. Finally, we're creating a new product we're now calling the Mamdani Monitor, a public tracker of every major policy issue, appointment, and other actions that affect Jewish security or others. We want full transparency, and we will hold this administration fully accountable. Now, let me be clear about what we want or need from this administration, and it's not hard. This is a very low bar. What do we want? Number one, don't appoint individuals with records of anti-Semitism to positions in City Hall. ADL has called it out when it's happened in the Trump administration. We've spoken out in other presidential and state-level administrations, and we think it's important here too in New York City. Number two, provide NYPD protection for every synagogue and day school, and make sure that our law enforcement officers have an annual anti-Semitism training so they understand this issue, which is so pernicious. Number three, secure Jewish community events, provide adequate security, make sure they are safe. Ensure schools post factual, unbiased education about the Middle East. Keep public spaces open so that when New Yorkers, including Zionists, are looking for space, they can find it here, right here inside the Big Apple. Now, I would say one last thing. It is very important to maintain the NYPD partnerships with Israeli counterintelligence and counterterrorism. I mean, the expertise has been shared, has helped to save lives and keep the city safe since 9/11. So I think these are pretty basic standards, not unreasonable demands. The very fact that we have to work this hard lays bare the fact that you should be telling your kids when they are at home, make sure they understand about where we are. If Mayor-elect Mamdani takes real steps to fight anti-Semitism and protect Jewish New Yorkers, trust me, we will be the first to acknowledge and appreciate it. We will not hesitate to congratulate him when he gets it right. There's nothing more we'd like than that to have happen, actually. But the reality is that we will not compromise nor relent to protecting the Jewish people, which is why we're here now, charting the path forward together. All right, so we have a couple great speakers we're blessed to have with us today, starting with Hindi Pupko. I'm so glad you're here, Hindi. For those who don't know, she's the Chief Strategy Officer at UJA Federation here in New York. Hindi and her entire team have long been incredible partners to ADL, and we're glad to be standing shoulder to shoulder to them in this critical moment for the New York Jewish community. I'm also grateful to introduce Rabbi David Ingber, Senior Director of Jewish Community and Bronfman Center for Jewish Life at 92NY, as well as founder and Senior Rabbi of Romemu, a non-denominational shul here in New York City. Folks, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So I have some questions, but maybe we could just give you guys a chance to kind of frame the moment. Hindi, why don't we start with you?
Sure.
Talk about where you think we are, what you think this moment calls for, if you would.
Great. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you all for being on. I want to start with some good news. Last night, we saw historic Jewish voter turnout, and none of that is a coincidence. Over the past few months, we, together with our partners at ADL and Jewish Voters Unite, every synagogue, JCC, this is the work that Jewish New Yorkers have been doing. 25,000 new Jewish voters registered. And if you look at the total population of the new vote, Jews make up 20% of the total new vote. We should all feel incredibly proud of it. And it wasn't only historic turnout for Mamdani. There was historic turnout for Cuomo. Cuomo actually won more votes, 100,000 more votes than Mike Bloomberg's most successful election. So that's really important to keep in mind. It's also important to keep in mind that Mamdani won by around 50%. De Blasio in his first term won by 74%. So this was not a blowout. This was not all New Yorkers voting for one candidate. In fact, our city is quite divided. And what I would say is the way in which Jewish New York showed up last night, that's exactly what we're going to have to be doing over the course of the next few weeks, months, and years. We need to continue to show up and be organized in that kind of way. The commitment that UJA is making to our community is no different than the one that you heard from Jonathan and from ADL today and last night. We're going to watch everything that comes out of City Hall, and we will call balls and strikes. We will call it as we see it, and we will ensure that our Jewish community's voice is heard.
Thank you, Hindi. I will say before we go to Rabbi Ingber, Hindi, you have been such a terrific collaborator and partner. I know on behalf of all of us at ADL, we are so deeply grateful for the tight alignment and close cooperation with UJA Federation. So thank you.
It's mutual. Thank you.
Rabbi Ingber, help us frame this moment and put it in context beyond just the last few days.
Yeah, well, it's good to be with you, and it's good to be with you, Hindi, and also thank you to everybody who's showing up for this important webinar. Before I start, I wanted to also say and make it clear that I'm speaking as a rabbi and as a private citizen, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the 92nd Street Y or for Romemu. I think I love that Hindi started with positive news, and I think that to begin in that place is really a smart thing. I think that obviously Jewish anxiety is heightened, and I speak for myself. I'm here in Miami with 20 rabbis talking about viewpoint diversity over the last 2 days, and there's a tremendous amount of anxiety. But there's also a lot of memory that we hold, 2,000 years of Jewish memory that holds us in good stead in moments like this. We know what it is to strengthen our identity. We know what it is to strengthen our institutions. We know what it is to strengthen really the center, which is the most important place for Jews and Jewish safety, is strengthening the center. And so, not every statement that's going to come out of this administration deserves our outreach, but we actually need now to double down on strategic reactions and not just reactions themselves. We need to really think about how we as a community can mobilize ourselves, or that Hindi just spoke to. We need to think about what a winning strategy is going to be going forward in order for us to reassert the centrality of Israel, the centrality of our Jewish identity. And to that end, I think a lot of us are thinking already about what might, not a great defense, but also a great offense might look like going forward. So I think all of these are in some way heightening our survival instincts, which have been, heightened over the last 2,000 years and honed over the last 2,000 years. So I think that this moment, of course, is fraught. This moment is scary, and that's true. And it's also important to remember that we have our, capacities to deal with moments like this because we've dealt with much, much worse before. So that's kind of the first way I wanted to begin this conversation.
That's great. Thank you, Rabbi. So what I'd like to do is just to kind of open it up with that framing and kind of talk a little bit about where we go from here. I think that's what I'm hearing a lot of people say to me, like, what does this mean for me? Am I safe here? How does UJA Hindi respond to this new reality? There's so much that you reach. There's so many programs and sort of spheres of public life that you touch and support. What does this mean for UJA?
Thanks, Jonathan. I first want to remind us that we continue to have a lot of friends and allies in City Hall, in Albany, and in Washington. I think an interesting point of fact is Mark Levine, who's an incredibly well-known friend of the Jewish community. He himself is a self-proclaimed pro-Israel Zionist Jew. He won New York City Comptroller by a landslide, right? His Zionism did not preclude him from public office, quite the opposite. He won handily with over 70% of the vote. Part of what UJA has been doing and what we will continue to do is to work with allies like Mark Levine, Brad Hoyland-Siegel, and others. We have made it clear to them that we're going to rely on them. We're going to need their help. And that if there are efforts in City Hall or Albany to delegitimize or isolate the state of Israel, we're going to count on them to be our bulwark. And I would say it's the job of all Jewish New Yorkers to know the names of their state senators, their city council members, their assembly members. Long gone are the days where we could sort of get away with only caring about what happens in Washington. We need to be part of our community boards. We need to run for local office, and we certainly need to be inviting our local elected officials over for Shabbat dinner. Jonathan, I think one of the big questions for us is which Mamdani will we see in office? Over the course of his campaign, he has said repeatedly, I ran on affordability, and that will be my focus. Time will tell. In the assembly, affordability was not his focus. It was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We will be gratified if we see a Mayor Mamdani that was similar to the one who campaigned, who did not isolate the state of Israel. So Jonathan, when you list your requests of the administration, let me add that one on, that we request that he follow through on his commitment to make affordability and improving the lives of New Yorkers his focus and not foreign policy. Should I say one word about security, Jonathan?
Well, let's talk security, and then we're going to go to Rabbi Ingber.
Okay. I don't want to stand in front of the rabbi. So let's talk about security. This might sound crazy to people on the call, but not that long ago, Jewish security looked like one professional and a $250,000 budget. And before Tree of Life, that actually felt okay until it felt completely irresponsible. And now we are blessed to have the Community Security Initiative, Mitch Silber, 25 people who wake up every single day thinking about the Jewish security of New York. There's an intel capacity done in partnership with ADL. Almost weekly, an attack they've suspected and given to law enforcement, someone they flagged for NYPD. This is the work that we are standing on the shoulders of. In this moment, over the next weeks and months, you'll see new work out of CSI to ensure, as Jonathan said, that we're prepared for anything. Many of you are familiar with the volunteer security patrols that you've seen in Brooklyn, known as Shomrim and Shmira. You will start to see volunteer security patrols on the streets of Manhattan and the Bronx. Not because we want to create hysteria, quite the opposite. We are reinforcing our Jewish security presence so that Jews of New York feel that they can continue to live proud and public Jewish lives.
Bravo, kol hakavod. And I will just say before we go to Rabbi Ingber, how proud ADL is to be working in close partnership with UJA Federation and CSI. Our new JTIP programs allowed us to increase the intelligence sharing, to improve the collaborative work. And we look forward to having your people sit in the investigative research lab, continuing to find ways to.
Absolutely.
They're very pleased about that. Okay, Rabbi Ingber, how do you, if I might ask you a question, which is both political and somewhat spiritual. One of the comments that I heard this morning in an interview that I did, I've heard from others, is that the mayor-elect does not have a problem with Jewish people and is not anti-Semitic. He is just anti-Zionist. How do those things fit together? Are they consonant or discordant? What do you think about that?
Well, obviously, there's a connection, but it's really behooves us in the Jewish community to understand that connection and to double down on making that clear. But before I go there, I just want to just double back on something that Hindi said that I completely agree with. And I think from day one, we need the mayor to say that he's involved in governing New York City and not relitigating the Middle East. Like, that's a vital concern. Everyone who said to me or said out loud or said, like, this is not a referendum on the Middle East. He's going to be a local mayor. And others, like I'm sure many, if not all of us on this webinar, were saying no. It's the largest concentration of Jews outside of Israel, as you said, more Jews than in Tel Aviv. It can't just be about local politics and affordability. As Hindi said, if the mayor can commit and we can hold his feet to the fire and we continue to double down on you are the mayor of New York City, and as you said, you have a responsibility to all of its citizens, then don't relitigate Middle Eastern politics. Like, keep us safe, right? And keep your promise. And so that's something that I just wanted to say that we need from day one. And on the second point here about Zionism and anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, listen, denying Jewish self-determination under the banner of anti-Zionism, it fuels anti-Semitism. And I think that we can get into the game of making claims about anti-Semitism that are easily rebuffed by those who support this mayor. He's clearly said over and over again all the things that Jews want to hear. I'm going to keep you safe. I'm going to protect you. You have my word. But he needs to be held really clearly to how he intends to protect us when one of his core ideological statements calls into question, right, major pieces of the majority of Jews' self-identity and calls Israel a criminal state. So it behooves him to explain to us, and we need to continue to double down on explaining to others why anti-Zionism fuels anti-Semitism, right? And when people say to us, well, you can be critical of the government or you can be critical, all of those things are true. But when you deny people's right to self-determination, it leads inexorably to there being some kind of bullseye on Jews. And as my colleague Eli Castro said, it's really hard to convince people when that you're the fire department when you're also an arsonist. And so I think that we have to find ways to communicate clearly that connection. It's not a soundbite. It's not even easy to say here on this webinar. It doesn't belong on a bumper sticker. But to the extent that we can make that smoother, it's going to be much easier to make the case that his offensive ideas about Israel also make New York Jews feel less safe. And the last thing I'm going to say is about this moment also is that it'll be great to have ways of checking in on Mamdani, the Mamdani monitor, whatever it is, to the extent that it works. I applaud those efforts, but I think that offensive speech is different than speech that leads to harm. And speech that will lead to harm, we in the Jewish community should also hold that line with Mayor Mamdani and his administration. There is speech that leads to harm, and we have to be willing to elevate that from the noise. Right? There's going to be a lot of noise, but the signal will be clear. If there are ideas and statements that we know have led in the past to danger to Jews, it behooves them to explain how they will monitor themselves for that. That I think is important.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know it's something, again, in the spirit of this being a conversation, right? All of us talking, like I'll say, we struggle with this at ADL. I mean, this is an organization that was founded in large part, defend the First Amendment, including freedom of speech and freedom of expression, let alone freedom of assembly and these other rights. And yet it feels like freedom of assembly is not a mob, in front of the Nova exhibit, screaming and threatening the people trying to walk in. And freedom of expression is not inciting violence against people because of how they, where they worship or how they identify. These things seem incongruous with each other, but I want to ask Hindi to build on something that Rabbi Ingber talked about, how somebody said we have a bullseye on the back. So I want to ask you about BDS.
Yeah.
As the mayor-elect has said, he believes in BDS because it's a nonviolent movement. What do you think that would portend for New York City and Jewish New Yorkers specifically if he adopted policies or tried to implement practices related to it? And I should say, a related issue is the Cornell Technion site, which many
Yeah.
of our viewers who may or may not be in New York City may or may not know. We should talk about that as well, because he
Yep.
floated the idea of reviewing it,
Yep.
really with an eye towards shutting it down. And I want to talk about why that might be problematic.
Yeah. So like you said, Jonathan, we want to get ahead of this one, and we are ahead of this one. So let's talk about what we have in place in New York. When Cuomo was governor, he enacted an executive order protecting essentially New York State from attempts to engage in BDS. So right now it is unlawful for a state agency or an agency or group or business that does business with the state to also engage in a boycott of the state of Israel. It is our analysis and understanding that that does not cover the city, and we would like it to cover the city. Our teams are already in touch with your teams, Jonathan and others, to decide if maybe this year can we go for what we always needed in this city and state, which is anti-BDS fulsome legislation covering all of city and state. That's what we mean when we talk about proactive measures. We need to expand that Cuomo executive order to cover City Hall, because yes, Jonathan, it would be devastating on many fronts, not to mention economically devastating for New Yorkers if in fact the Mamdani administration engaged in any kind of BDS activity. There's been a lot of conversation about Israel bonds and our pension funds. This is why people like Mark Levine are so critical. So our incoming city controller has pledged publicly, not just privately, but publicly, that he will reinvest in Israel bonds. And the argument that we need to be prepared to make to New Yorkers is not just the moral arguments that we make for ourselves, but also the way in which Israel bonds and Israeli companies have actually brought jobs and dividends to working class New Yorkers, which brings me to Cornell Tech. We've started to do a little bit of research on Cornell Tech. And honestly, Jonathan, it is something that we should all be proud of. Cornell Tech is on track to be the most lucrative private-public partnership across any city in this country. The amount of jobs it has provided, the economic boon that it has meant for the real estate and for the people of the city, those are the arguments that we are going to be prepared to make, alongside holding our elected officials accountable. So, Liz Kruger represents the district where Cornell Tech is. That's the Upper East Side. If you live on the Upper East Side, reach out to your local elected officials. Don't wait for there to be a BDS bill on the table. Reach out now and say, Cornell Tech is critical to the city, and here's why. It's important to New Yorkers, and here's why. We have to stop only making the Jewish argument. Make the Jewish argument, but then make the argument about why it's important for all New Yorkers. So UJA, ADL, and others, just to be clear, we are engaged in proactive advocacy to protect our city and state against any BDS attempts. And alongside that, we are going to begin making arguments about why Israeli companies and businesses are great for the city.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, I think there is something about these campaigns, these programs. They're not based on, again, the ROI of the project. His objection to Cornell isn't on the basis of the quality of the research. These claims rest on an ideological kind of doctrinaire basis rather than a factual one. And so, look, if the facts bore out that it wasn't generating jobs, maybe we feel differently, right? But it is. It is. So, Rabbi Ingber, we talk about Jewish people. There was an incident, as you may have seen, of graffiti at a day school in Brooklyn today that was, defaced with red swastikas, which really is just another day in the life in New York City. How would you characterize, from your view at 92 NY, like the mood of the Jewish community? Because 92 NY and Romemu, this is a non-denominational shul. 92 NY is really an open and inclusive place for all New Yorkers.
Yeah.
How would you talk about the mood of what you are feeling from your congregants and your community members?
Yeah, I can speak for myself personally, and I can also speak for other rabbis who are here. I mean, the vast majority of colleagues that I speak to have pinpointed like one essential piece that's emerged over the last 2 years was the tension in values between having inclusive and open communities on the one hand and having boundaries and clear defined values and
Mhm.
standing for something, and the tension between those two places, right, where you have an open tent, a really broad tent where people can come in, it's, heterodox, and we don't assume, what you mean when you say God or Israel and Torah, the basic building blocks of Jewish religious community, or broad, Jewish communities with really exciting diversity of opinions. And when that meets opinions and platforming ideas that are really antithetical to our values, and right, so there's a lot of tension, a lot of divisions happening. And then my colleague Michal Bitan mentioned this morning, like this notion that in Jewish history, that there's been a really wide tent for almost all ideas to some extent. There have been moments, of course, of excommunication or excision, but for the most part, most Jewish communities have kind of broadened, and even from rabbinic literature on, you had various viewpoints that were arguing and that led to schisms, and then eventually they were included in the community. But she said the one example in history that where things didn't go well, where there were splits, where communities split and never returned, were when Jews perceived other Jews supporting oppressors, where they took the side of those who were oppressing the Jewish community. And so the danger happening now
Can you talk about
with
that? What can you elaborate a little bit? Like, what are the examples you're drawing on when you talk about that?
So, I mean, the scholars talk about the period before the mission of the second century codification of Jewish law, where there was a great schisms were everywhere. There were, factions, and were arguing, and it was clear that Jewish continuity was dependent on what the Mishnah did, which was to include dissenting opinions, ostensibly to widen the tent, right, to include those who were previously outside of the tent. But there are examples in Jewish history where Jews were perceived to be in some way colluding with or participating in or taking the side of an oppressor who was oppressing the Jews themselves, and we can come up with numerous examples of that. And that was not good for the community. And so now the danger, the fault line right now, is that there are many who perceive, of course, those who are on the other side as being dangerous to the existential future of the Jewish people. And so I think what's been disclosed in the last 2 years with the Gaza war was to the extent to which Israel had become essential to the American Jewish experience or the global Jewish experience. Right? It had replaced religion. You can imagine that in the Middle Ages, if you didn't believe in God, you wouldn't get an aliyah in your synagogue. You wouldn't be invited to get an honor in the synagogue. And we have that now vis-a-vis Israel, right? And so I think that the places where the community might tear apart are really, it's pretty dangerous at this moment, I think. So we have to find a way for those who do love Israel. Let's put on the side some who have, the anti-Zionists who are a fringe group, but those who are struggling with Israel but who love Israel, people who are critical of Israel but love Israel, or believe in its fundamental right to be our nation state. We have to find a way to include them into our communities in some way. I think Jewish unity is dependent on the ability now for us to make this bridging happening, right? This isn't necessarily a rupture. It could be a rerouting. It doesn't have to be about that excision and that separation. Maybe there are parts of the community that will fall off, but we have to do our best to bring in those who are still in love with Israel. And I think that's true more broadly, that history has shown that we Jews and our safety is dependent on there being a thriving center, a thriving middle, right? It's the extremes that tear us apart. And right now, I think a lot of anxiety amongst Jews I speak to, people I speak to, about the fringes and the horseshoe. So I think it's really important for us to strengthen the center and to strengthen those bonds. This could be a moment, again, of rerouting and not of rupture, of clarification about who we are. And I'm hoping that it is, frankly. I'm hoping that Jewish institutions will double down on connection and on clarifying who we are.
Look, that's super interesting. I mean, I think about often this, that we're living in an age of extremes, right? And I know you see it too, Hindi. I see it at ADL, where the extremes, as you talk about them, Rabbi, are kind of trying to both tear us apart and kind of seize the center and mainstream themselves, which makes it all very difficult. So let me ask, I'm a dad, I'm a parent, there are a lot of parents, grandparents watching today. I'd love for both of you to talk about, like, how do we wrestle with and contend with the fact that we think Zionism is so essential to our identity as Jews. And I fundamentally do. I don't think there is Judaism without Zionism. I think that because Zionism didn't start with Theodor Herzl, right? It started with Moshe Rabbeinu. It has been fundamental to our identity, such that in every Siddur, in every shul, in every country on the planet, since the Torah was, first inscribed, it's talked about Yerushalayim and Zion and Israel and so on and so forth. But many of the young people who voted for Mamdani did so despite his anti-Zionism, or some even because of it. So how do we, again, contend with that as an organization like UJA, or as a congregation like Romenu, so communally and spiritually, when these people are saying that they don't feel the connection? How do you think about that?
I'm happy to take a stab, but obviously the rabbi on the call is the expert on this. The truth is, Jonathan, the formula, so to speak, is not a secret, right? We've known for a long time about the things that, quote, work. And when I say work, I mean, what are the inputs to create engaged, committed Jewish Americans?
Yeah.
Young Jews who grow up in highly literate and engaged homes, who visit Israel, who know Israelis, who have an intimate connection with Jewish life and with Israel, come out like many of the folks on this call. Sure, they could disagree with parts of it, what Bibi does or doesn't do, but fundamentally, that commitment and connection is there. There is no other secret magic bullet or thing that we haven't thought of. It's the Jewish camps, it's schools, it's supplementary education, it's friendships, and I think it's connections to Israelis. Some of the most important trips to Israel that we lead are ones where Americans engage with Israelis that actually look and act a lot like them. We bring labor unions to Israel, and they meet with labor leaders in Israel. And what I think is most interesting about these trips, regardless of who they are, elected officials, faith leaders, they all say that the most meaningful and impactful part of the trip was Friday night dinner. Right?
Oh, really?
Being at Shabbat, it's not the coach. I'm like, wait a minute, we could do Shabbat dinner in New York, right? And part of what we have to do, and I think our young people want to be part of this, is reach out more, right? Our local rabbis are meeting this moment, and we need to help them meet this moment. If there's a public housing unit in a district, the rabbis should know the tenant leaders. The rabbi should know the church leader next door. Those relationships need to exist, and I think young Jews are energized when they see us not just standing up for our values and our priorities, but also reaching out and bringing people into those conversations, literally and proverbially, around the Shabbat dinner table.
Yeah.
Should I jump in on that, Jonathan, or just
Please.
no? Just I couldn't agree more. But I would say that if we're clear about who we are and yet open, it doesn't mean that we're platforming ideas that we disagree with, but like the ability to both disagree with someone and articulate why we disagree with them, and yet leave open, as Indy said, the possibility of connection and community is vital. I also think that, listen, we're not going to out-tweet anti-Semitism, right? It's just not going to, we have to outbuild it. And the way to outbuild anti-Semitism and outbuild anti-Zionism is to double down on building, right, thriving Zionist, openly proud Jewish communities that are also inclusive, right? We shouldn't be wagging our finger necessarily, but we should just be living proudly and expressing it that way. And as Cindy said, and I think that Romamu, my own community, and others, Dan Sonor, a friend, colleague, and member of our community, said it well last year, that the state of world Jewry will depend on strengthening what Judaism has always done well. It's always been a beautiful tradition, a resourceful tradition. It gives joy and clarity and wisdom and all those things, and we need to double down on that. And I just want to say one last thing. It might be slightly off, but it is a little bit connected to where things are going. I gave a sermon Friday night, this past Friday night, about the election. And I posed questions to those who were kind of on the fence, who were Zionists, who loved Israel, but who might vote for Mamdani nonetheless. And I asked them to imagine a litmus test by which we would know whether or not this risk that New York is about to take is actually, a risk that failed or not, that it was an experiment that failed. I would love to know if we could articulate as a community, of you or anybody, leaders can articulate, what would a New York that is sending signals, maybe this is what the Mamdani monitor is, or whether we have to be clarified, like what will be the signal that this risk, this huge risk, has failed? X number of Zionist, anti-Zionist rhetoric, and anti-Semitic slurs, when Israelis no longer feel comfortable speaking in Hebrew, which we already are seeing over and over again, or having Israeli flag. So I think it's worth like asking and posing questions, even to people who disagree with us, who voted for Mamdani, to ask them, okay, I get it. You're willing to take a risk, but can you tell me when you will admit that maybe things have gone too far? It's kind of like a strategic question for them.
Yeah, I'll sort of, I think, try to answer that and then respond to some audience questions. I mean, I think for us, the complexifying thing here, the thing that's really naughty, is to say that you're opposed to anti-Semitism, but then to, promote anti-Semitic ideas is a real challenge. It's dissonant. Like to say that you're going to protect all Jews, and then to say, call out, you'll even have Zionists in your administration, as if there's some
Quota.
yeah, like. That feels, again, very discordant and exclusive rather than inclusive. And to say that you want everyone to feel safe in the city, then to promote ideas that like definitely don't make Jews safe, as if they're valid, like the Intifada bit, very hard to follow. One of the questions that's been asked in the chat is whether ADL, and I'm going to put it to both of you as well, would meet with Mamdani. Or if he extended knowledge and said he wanted to meet, would we accept it? What I'll say about that is, as CEO of ADL, I will not meet him on my own. I think we have a responsibility, like a fidelity, if you will, to our sort of fellowship as Jews. I'm not going to do that meeting without UJA. I'm not going to do that meeting without some spiritual leadership as well. So I think we've really got to approach this in a manner which accommodates for the fact that we're one community and we're in this together. I'll also say to the question that was asked, like the way I see it, like I don't have a problem with this mayor-elect, again, because of his party affiliation or anything else about him. My concern is what he means for the Jewish people. That's it. And it doesn't matter that he's a DSA member. It could be a Tea Party member. It could be anything. That's the sheer singular basis of our concern. Just what he has said or not said, as you will, about Jews. So Hindi, how do you feel, or Rabbi Ingber, how do you feel if you ring on the phone right now from the mayor-elect's office? Would you meet him?
So we had another version of that question in our offices this morning. Picture it's a year from now or a month away from Hanukkah. Typically, City Hall does a Hanukkah party. Do we go to the Hanukkah party? Let's assume there's a Hanukkah party. Do we go? And I'd say the overwhelming sentiment, not to use a sports analogy, but sometimes they're the best. I think the overwhelming sentiment was the ball's in his court. And what we mean by that is, I think we need to see steps, not just words, to your point, Jonathan, but also actions at City Hall that put Jewish New Yorkers at ease.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Let us, to your point, Rabbi Ingber, what are the signs? If they stop selling kosher hot dogs at Yankee Stadium, that's a scary sign. And it might sound silly, but actually the first kosher restaurant I learned in this city was 1860. Right? Jewish New Yorkers are part of the fabric of this city.
Was it Bravo Pizza, by the way?
No, it was a slightly more elevated restaurant. I've never been. But the truth is, the city is as long as our history is here, that we are woven together. We need to continue to feel like we belong here. We need to continue to feel like the city's history is our history, that our fates are linked. And I think what we want to see from a Mamdani administration are signals, clues, and concrete actions that tell us, yes, you remain a critical part of the city, and we want you to be. And then we'll say yes to a Hanukkah party, yes to a meeting, but we need to see some of that first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think for me, litmus test will be the first time, it's already happened in his neighborhood in Astoria, Queens, where someone, graffiti, spray paints Zionism as racism, or Zionists are baby killers, and whether his administration can name that as hate speech and name that moment as an anti-Semitic moment, that will arrive. And I think that of course, we have to meet with him. The question is, as you said, well, Jonathan, like what will be the terms in which we'll meet with him and in what ways, and that we as Jewish leaders have to represent the Jewish community who will be behind us and depending on us to say the difficult things to him in public ways about ways that he is not responding or not adequately meeting the concerns of our constituents in our communities. And so I don't know how you sway the persuadables out there if you don't engage in public persuasion. He is the most powerful person in New York City, and we are heavily dependent on him on many levels. So I think that we have to meet with him, but how we meet with him and under what conditions, I agree with you, Hindi, that remains to be seen. I think that we should be judicious in that way.
So a question's come up here in the chat in a few different ways about Jewish education. The role of Jewish education in shaping our kids, the quality of Jewish education, if it currently is where it needs to be. I grew up in a conservative home. I went to public school, and I went to Hebrew school and to Merkaz, like Hebrew high school after my bar mitzvah. How do you guys feel about our Jewish education today? And is it preparing our young people for this new world, this Mamdani world, if you will? And if it's not, what can we do to make it better?
Rabbi, you want to start?
I knew you can do that, Indy. I mean, listen, I'll just say what I'm not. I don't buy into the narrative that I see frequently now that we've inadequately prepared people for the rude awakening that happens when they hear about the Nakba or the Palestinian narrative and so on. I think, I don't buy that. I think that's a small percentage of people who grew up like me in an Orthodox day school or someone who was exposed to heavily Zionist context, and then they're surprised, right? I do think, of course, I do agree that we should be giving a broad overview of the region, and we should definitely be filling in our children on things that they'll hear and know how to respond to them and understand them more broadly. I don't think that we should be educating about Israel in a way that's overly narrow, because of course it does set you up to be surprised. But I think there's a way. I just think that we need to continue to develop a curricula that is rooted in Jewish pride, rooted in a love for Israel, love for Torah, love for being Jewish, and an awareness of the complexity of Jewish history. And I also wanted to say last thing I'll say, and I'll give it back to you, Hindi, because this is such a big thing, a big topic to talk about Jewish education. But in many ways, we are now reaping the unintended consequences of putting almost all of our eggs in the Israel basket over the last 50 to 60 years. I think that many educators and many people in Jewish life for years were saying, birthright Israel is amazing, but birthright Judaism is its natural, complement. To the extent that we didn't root a love for Israel in what you said earlier, Jonathan, in the broader sweep of Jewish history, that there's no way to understand what it is to be a Jew without understanding what Yerushalayim is and what Hebron is and what the entire geography is so much a part of who we are. So I think that we have work to do to catch up on that more broadly, and immersive Jewish experiences are the sine qua non of a more engaged Jewish life, without a doubt.
Yeah, I would say, Jonathan, if a parent calls me and says, my kid's about to go to campus, could you send me talking points? Right?
Do you get that?
Before I send talking points, I often say, tell me a little bit more about your kid. Yeah. Have they been to Israel? Have they been to Jewish summer camp? Yeah. How do they identify? Right? There's no one sheet of paper, right, that can make up for what has to happen over the course of 18 years before a kid walks onto campus. And what's been incredibly gratifying over the past couple of years is I think after 10/7, Jewish parents get this. And we see Jewish parents making different choices than they did before 10/7. There are groups of parents that have self-organized in independent schools and public schools who have said, not only do we need to fight for our kids, but we want our kids to be more Jewishly engaged and Jewishly educated. And we're seeing record high turnout for programs that people didn't go to before. So whether it's synagogue attendance or JCC programs or classes about what's happening in Israel, the Jewish community, I think, understands that to be a proud and strong Jew in this moment means to be an educated Jew in this moment. And part of that also, Jonathan, I'm sure we'll get to it, but I'm just going to do it now in case we don't. We also need to continue to give Jews of New York and across this country the opportunity to be reminded about all the things that make us love being Jewish. Not just the things that we need to fight for, but the things we enjoy. There's been a lot of conjecture about, will there be an Israel parade? Let me be clear, there will absolutely be an Israel parade this year. It's on May 31st, and we hope everyone will be there with us. But it's not just an Israel parade that we're doing this year. It might sound silly, but in a few weeks, we're going to actually break the record for the world's biggest Shabbat dinner, right? And on November 21st, more than 3,000 Jews are going to sit down for Shabbat dinner in the heart of New York City at the Javits Center, right? It's not just because we care about breaking a record. It's because we understood that in November, Jews might be feeling a little bit more anxious. And it's our job as UJA Federation, and I know Rabbi Ingber feels this as well, for anyone who's in a professional capacity in the New York Jewish community today. Our job is to continue to create those spaces, not just for ourselves, the grown-ups, but for our young people to walk into those spaces and to feel like there's something that they want to fight for, that this is identity that they feel proud of, that they love. It's a community that gives them a sense of belonging. That's what we need to go for. And there's no talking points that can do all of that work for them. It's 18 years of hard work, immersive experiences, and connectedness, and we're committed to providing that to every Jewish child.
Bravo. I'll note, number one, that November 21st is my birthday. So I was assuming
That's why we did it.
I had heard about the thing.
Congratulations.
I had thought that Eric was putting together a birthday party for me at the Javits Center. Apparently,
For you.
that's somewhat
We
wrong.
just blew the surprise.
I'm a little confused. I hope he'll clarify. Yeah, I want to ask a hard question, and we're about to wrap it. It's come up in the chat. I know I deal with this. I'm sure you do. All of you do. How do we contend with and talk about for a community that holds Israel so close, and we do? As I said, I do not think you can divorce or disentangle Zionism from Judaism, because we may be a community in diaspora, but the return to Zion is essential to our faith. That's why we all pray in the same direction and so on. And yet, sometimes people in Zion, elected officials, cabinet members, certain ministers, I think you can imagine what I'm talking about, will say things that clash with our values here, or that run afoul of some of the normative behaviors that we cherish in the United States in our New York Jewish community. So to that disaffected young person, or to that Gentile person, like, how do we talk about our love for Israel when we have people who espouse hateful ideas in Israel? And then how does that manifest in terms of when a mayor-elect or another politician like conflates them together?
Yeah, I don't think it's a hard question. It's the right question, Jonathan. We want Israel to be treated like every other country. Israel is a democracy, right? America is a democracy. For many Americans, the way they actually express their love of America is by criticizing politicians or speaking out, engaging in the electoral process. Israel should be treated no differently. You love a Knesset member? Say it. You disagree with them? Of course, say it. And that shouldn't cause dissonance. That's actually what it means to be a thriving democracy with an engaged electorate, with a whole group of citizens and a group of people in the diaspora who care deeply about what goes on. Of course, speak up and share that, because that shows a commitment. None of that should concern us or does concern us.
Right.
What does concern us is what David said, Rabbi Ingber said earlier, around a fundamental rejection of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. Once you accept Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, it's all fair game. Of course, criticize, speak out. But by the way, if all you're doing is criticizing, I'm a little suspicious, right? But if you're doing a combination of calling balls and strikes, like this prime minister, don't love this one, I hope this Knesset members are not, that's all fair game. And we should not just be okay with it. We should be embracing that level of engagement.
I will just name a dissonance, though. I mean, like, I know that we're about to end, but like, there has been, like, those of us who actually who speak about Israel democracy as one of its crowning features, it's a feather in our cap. Like, look at the Middle East and then look at Israel, and we talk about, democratic values, and nobody in Israel agrees with one another. And if you disagree with Israel's policies, you're just like the Knesset. Have you ever seen the Knesset? I mean, that's the kind of the way that we speak about it. But then on the other hand, over the last 2 years, there have been, I think, legitimate concerns for even those who do believe that it's completely legitimate to be critical of Israel. In fact, not only legitimate, it's an obligation to be critical. It's participating in democracy. You have been legitimately wary of the weaponization of that value by those in the United States and in other places who see criticism of Israel as, an opportunity to kind of embed their anti-Zionism or embed their double standardism or whatever it is. And so I think that argument has been complicated over the last 2 years. Let's just name it as such. It's been a complicated argument. It's like, not every rabbi wants to get up and pile on against the policies of Israel when he knows that every Jew hater and Israel hater is doing the same thing. So I think that I agree wholeheartedly with you, Hindi, and I also think that it's reiterating that, and showcasing that the robust nature of Israel democracy, the robust nature of how how Israel engages politically, and we are entitled to too, while also reminding people about their willingness to write off the entire country based on either its conduct or its policies, like as if it were a debate that we want to entertain. It's not a debate. Like, Israel is a fact; it's an existential fact. Unless people are advocating for it's absurd even to think about what they mean, like the eradication of Israel. What does that even look like? It's as if it were still something to be debated and then concluded. Israel is a fact. It's a robust country. It has leaders that do all kinds of things, and just reminding people that one of the famous Zionists said that when will we know when Israel is like everyone else is, when we have Israeli thieves and Israeli this and criminals and so on. It's a country like everything else on some level, but I think it's complicated, and we have to return to that place where we're able to be vocal about our critiques, and also give people a good pushback when they go over the top.
I so appreciate what you said. I would only amend it slightly to say the Jewish state of Israel is a fact.
Yes.
Those who would speak to, denuded of that identity.
Absolutely.
The Jewish state of Israel is a fact.
Right.
The Jewish people live. Just a couple thoughts as we get ready to wrap. Questions have been asked in here about whether or not people should emigrate and make aliyah or stay and fight. Look, if you love something, you got to be willing to fight for it. I love this city. I love this community. I love this country. And I love Israel too, don't get me wrong. But I want this place to stay as wonderful as it is for the generations to follow. So you better believe we're going to fight for it. Someone asked about the Mamdani monitor. So what we've done at ADL is we've launched at adl.org/NYC a tip line for Jews living here who experience anti-Semitism in an environment that we think where it may intensify because of the rhetoric and the actions of elected officials. We're going to be hyper local and hyper focused. If you see something, say something. Go to adl.org/NYC, tell us. And we've launched the Mamdani monitor. We're just going to track what happens out of City Hall, the people who get appointed, the programs that get prioritized, the policies that get introduced. Without, if you will, judgment. We are simply going to evaluate them as we've done at ADL, universities, state governments, large language models. And I think shining a light on the information is the best thing we can do. And maybe good things will happen. And hey, that would be great, wouldn't it? We're gonna wrap, but before I do, just like each of you, a headline. What gives you hope? First, let's go to you, Hindi, and then you, Rabbi Ingber.
I mean, Jewish New Yorkers we are residents of the largest Jewish community outside of Israel. I often say we're also the smartest and the best Jewish community. But most seriously, people look at what happens in the city. People look to the Jewish community of New York to lead. They're going to be taking our cues from us. How we react in this moment will be recorded for generations. And how we act in this moment is up to us. We have that agency, nobody else. So I would say, let's all use this opportunity to make history, to demonstrate to other Jewish communities what it looks like to be proud and public Jews and to stand up for everything that we believe in.
Bravo. Rabbi Ingber, you have the last word.
It dawned on me a couple of years ago that the most important ritual that we do on the high holidays is blowing this dead bone, this desiccated, dry bone. And it reminded us, of course, of Ezekiel 37, where God says, I will revivify those dry bones. They'll come to life again. And that becomes immortalized in the anthem of Hatikva, Od lo avda tikvatenu, we haven't lost our hope, which is a quote from Ezekiel, right? The Jews at that time said, we've lost our hope. And then the bones say, no, we haven't lost our hope. And we make a song in a bone, as the high holiday ritual. We are the Jews are the people of hope. It's like hope is something so inherent to who we are. We've been in worse situations before. And as Hindi said beautifully, we are a strong Jewish community. Hopefully this will catalyze us and remind us of what it is to be proud. I hope people will not hide their chai and not hide their Zionism now. We should be out proud and be diligent, but we should unite ourselves. We have a big couple of years ahead of us, and pulling things back to the center is, we are empowered to do that, and we need to do it. So Am Yisrael Chai, really, Am Yisrael Chai, we have it within us to continue to make things that seemed impossible possible. That's us. So let's go.
Love it.
Amen.
Love it. Guys, I cannot thank you enough. Like, not just for your comments today, although they were so meaningful, but just for the partnership, just for the spirit of collaboration. I mean, I think it reminds me, Kulanu, that we really are in this together, and we really are one people, sort of Am Yisrael. So I want to thank both Hindi and Rabbi Ingber for that. I want to thank all the ADL staff who works hard to put this together. And again, this was whipped up on very short notice. I want to thank all the people who listened in on the webinar. If you have questions or concerns, I would encourage you, go to adl.org. You can see the Mamdani monitor there. Go to uja.org. You can see all the great work that's happening at UJA. And I would encourage you to check out 92NY or Ramemu to learn more about Rabbi Ingber's work. Thank you, everyone. Be good, be strong, be safe. We'll be in touch.
Bye-bye.